Good afternoon and welcome to Lone Star Legal Aid's Law Talk Friday. This presentation is not intended to be legal advice. This is going to be information only. And I am an attorney with Lone Star Legal Aid's Family and Children's Rights Unit in the Houston office. Including the Houston office, we have 14 offices across 76 counties in Texas and Arkansas. My colleagues and I, we represent clients in a variety of family law issues, including divorce, custody, adoption, spousal maintenance, enforcement, and protective orders. Lone Star Legal Aid does not discriminate on the basis of race, color, religion, gender expression, sexual orientation, age, national origin, ancestry, disability, marital status, or military status in any of its activities or operations. You may ask questions in the chat box as we go through, but please keep it to very general questions. No questions that are specific to your circumstances, as that is not the proper forum. If you would like to know more information about your specific circumstances, you can contact Lone Star Legal Aid at 1-800-733-8394 or go to www.lonestarlegal.org for more information on legal assistance. And today we're very fortunate to be joined by several of our community partners for a presentation on Sexual Assault Awareness Month. This presentation is going to go into the types of services that our partners offer. And with that, I'm going to turn it over to our presenters to introduce themselves, starting with Ms. Coulter, and then we can move to Ms. Basie, and then we can move to Ms. Hill.
Good afternoon. My name is Maisha Coulter. I am the CEO of AVDA, Aid to Victims of Domestic Abuse. We are located here in the Houston office at 1001 Texas, downtown Houston. We also have two other locations in Fort Bend County as well as in Hempstead. We serve 8 counties contiguous to Harris County. Our services include legal advocacy. So we provide free legal representation to victims of domestic abuse and sexual assault. In the family courts, we provide protective orders as well as representation in all other family court matters to include divorce, custody, child support, modifications. In the instance where there has been a fatality around intimate partner violence, we do we do adoptions in those cases. In addition to our legal advocacy, we also provide trauma counseling. So we provide individual as well as group support counseling for survivors of domestic abuse and sexual assault. We have a BIP program. We actually have the largest BIP in the state of Texas, and that is Battering Intervention and Prevention Program. It is directed toward individuals who have been identified as perpetrators of domestic abuse in their intimate relationships. Usually they come to us as a result of a criminal conviction, whether that be a misdemeanor or a felony. Generally speaking, it can be a family violence assault case or some adjacent criminal act that would require them to participate in BIP. BIP is essentially 18 weeks of psychoeducation. Our facilitators are all mental health providers. They are generally licensed, either LPCs, LCSWs, psychologists, providing these services. And BIP for us is provided in 4 counties. Those include Harris, Fort Bend, Montgomery, and Galveston County.
Hi there. So my name is Shawnee Basie, and I serve as the Director of Strategic Programs at The Landing. The Landing is an agency with a mission to serve survivors of trafficking, whether that be adult or minor victims of trafficking, and for those who have been trafficked in the labor sector or in the sex industry. We are located in the Houston area as well. We operate a drop-in center for adults located on Bissonnette, which is a highly known area in Houston for trafficking and commercial sexual exploitation. We also operate a youth advocacy program serving minor victims of sex trafficking, or we call them commercially sexually exploited youth. And that program serves Harris and then the surrounding counties as well. We do outreach, community outreach to potential victims, whether that be street outreach, community outreach, online outreach interventions, reaching out to potential victims of sex trafficking, labor trafficking, sexual assault, that kind of thing.
Ms. Hill, please go ahead.
Thank you. So my name is Jennifer Hill. I am the Assistant Executive Director of the Children's Assessment Center. I was a prosecutor before I came to the CAC. Here at the CAC, we provide services to children who have been sexually abused or involved in child sex trafficking. We provide forensic interviews, medical examinations, therapy and psychological services, and training to the community free of charge. Our goal is to protect children, to heal families, and to prevent abuse.
Thank you all so much for these very informative introductions. And from listening to them, you hear that each one of your organizations provides a similar overlapping services, but also targets very different demographics that do not necessarily overlap. Could you speak a little bit more as to who is your typical client profile? Is there any specific demographic that is vulnerable to the different kinds of victimization that you help survivors recover from? And we'll start with that. Oh, yes, please, Ms. Coulter, and then Ms. Hill, and then Ms. Basie.
So AVDA, our primary population on the victim services side is a victim of domestic or sexual abuse who has the need for family law intervention, filing some type of lawsuit in that regard. Most of our clients typically are going to be individuals, usually females, who are coming to us having survived domestic abuse, and they're seeking to either divorce their intimate partner who has been abusive toward them, or pursue custody in regard to the children that they share in common. All of our clients have the right to legal services. We do qualify them based on whether or not they have had some type of abuse circumstance within the last 2 years. But we also look at income, but that is not something that would exclude them necessarily. It just means that we need to figure out which personnel within our organization is allowed to represent them. So we do have funds that are supporting our organization that require us to represent people who are on the federal poverty scales. We also have other resources that allow us to work with working poor populations. But the nexus of why they come to us is generally that they have been surviving some type of family violence dynamic, sexual abuse, economic abuse, mental health, mental or emotional abuse is what is driving them to try to look for legal representation. As far as the other service, as I explained earlier, we're also looking at the perpetrator of abuse, which is somewhat unique to our colleagues that are on the call, and even within the domestic violence and sexual abuse community, is trying to figure out a way to effectively eliminate domestic abuse or sexual assault by intervening with the perpetrator and trying to provide them with tools so that they will not continue to offend in that way. So that is the sort of a unique place for a social service provider in the conversation that we're having today.
Ms. Hill?
In our client basis, all children who are victims of child sexual abuse and their families, we know that it can affect the whole family dynamic. So we provide services for the family members as well to help. And it's not one specific kind of person who can be a victim of sexual abuse. So I would say that our client base can be any child in the community, unfortunately, that is affected by sexual abuse.
So the Landing's mission is to serve survivors of trafficking, whether that's an adult victim or a minor victim of trafficking. We do this by engaging with those who have been identified as trafficking victims through screening tools that we use, but we also serve a population of individuals who have worked in the commercial sex trade in general, whether that be street-based sex work, in strip clubs, online, and pornography, whether or not they have an identified trafficker. And the reason that we do this is because we know that that population is, very vulnerable to being exploited. We also serve individuals who have been trafficked previously, and maybe they're currently not being trafficked, but they have had a trafficker at some point in their life. Or maybe they haven't, but they're still engaging in commercial sex work in some kind of way, exploitation in some kind of way, all to prevent, trafficking in the future, but also to provide a variety of services to help them, get on their feet. So we do case management, we do court advocacy, therapy, we provide basic needs, crisis intervention. Our advocates respond 24/7. To minors who have been recovered. So our population is adults and minors who've been trafficked, with the adult population and minor population that maybe they don't have a third-party trafficker, but they are engaging in commercial sex work.
Thank you all again for this great overview. And Ms. Coulter, you had mentioned that you have a unique program that helps with perpetrators and those actions. And so my next question is about prevention. Is there any work that the CAC or the Landing engage in with regards to prevention? And Ms. Coulter, if you have more to share about the prevention aspects and also any other work just out there with other organizations that you're familiar with, which is maybe leading the way with regards to how to prevent and bring an end to this public health crisis. And we'll start with Ms. Basie and then Ms. Coulter and then Ms. Hill.
So we are primarily, most of the work that we do is with victims. So this is after they've been exploited. We do prevention work in the form of awareness. So doing community events, raising alarms, helping identify teachers and law enforcement therapists, other agencies better identify trafficking victims or those who are at risk. So we do a lot of engagement with community partners in that way. A lot of the work we're doing is preventing, is secondary prevention, right? So preventing it from reoccurring, right? So that's why we are, initially when we started our agency, started the work that we're doing, we were serving adults, adult victims of trafficking. We soon found out that a large group of our clients had been trafficked as minors. And so we launched our youth advocacy program as a form of preventing further exploitation. So we do engage in prevention efforts and raising awareness, speaking to at-risk youth in schools or, detention centers, things like that, churches, anywhere in the community that will allow us to talk about this issue, to equip parents and first responders with the tools they need to, one, identify victims, but also, address some of the risk factors that are there.
And yeah, I would be remiss if I didn't talk about our community awareness and prevention program, which I sort of overlooked in my introduction. We do have a complete arm of folks who do exclusively prevention work. Our community awareness and prevention team are in the schools. So we're in HISD, Fort Bend ISD. We have 4 evidence-based curriculums that we provide to those schools that provide us with an opportunity to interact with the school population, the students, as it relates to healthy relationships, identifying what sexual abuse is, domestic violence, child abuse. We also work with them in understanding what consent is, accountability within those programs. Essentially, 2 of them are 8-week curriculums, and we just circulate throughout the school. Generally speaking, we're talking about high school population, We sometimes go into middle schools. We're not just exclusively in public schools. We also work within private school settings. So we're in some of the parochial schools, Catholic schools around Harris County. In addition to our youth-facing education and prevention work, we also do work with adult populations. As a matter of fact, before I appeared today, I was in Fort Bend County. We have a TCOLE accredited 8-hour domestic violence awareness training for law enforcement. And we provide with them an opportunity to do education around what domestic violence is, how their work intersects with the population, talking about appropriate interviewing tactics, using danger assessments and other risk analysis that will help them to be able to be proactive when they respond to victims of domestic abuse. So we go over that. We go over the penal code and laws that affect victims of domestic abuse, to include not just criminal, but also immigration laws that might be impactful for survivors who are pursuing status. So it's a very rich curriculum that is geared toward that particular population of first responders. Our hope is that they will be tooled with the right education to help break down barriers for survivors when they interact with them, and also be aware of not only our resource, but other resources within the community, so that when they happen upon someone who is a survivor, that they can give them the equipment to access the community and all of the responses that are available to them, so that they get the help that they need to not have to continue in these unsafe circumstances.
Thank you, Ms. Coulter. Let's move to Ms. Bassey, and then we'll see if we can move to Ms. Hill after.
I think I answered the question before, Ms.
Okay.
Coulter. Yes.
I believe she is back on, but in the meanwhile, I'll transition. Okay, Ms.
Sorry, my computer decided it needed to update this instant, so we're good. About our prevention efforts, we actually have a lot of trainings that are about prevention, because what we want to do is get in front of this problem before it starts. So we do trainings for prevention. We actually do have a program, an evidence-based program, the Monique Burr program for schools, that we give in schools, that is about age-appropriate conversations with children and teaching them about body safety. On our website, we have a list of prevention trainings. We also have a prevention guide that we've made that's listed on our website that can be viewed for different youth serving organizations or for concerned adults who maybe just want to learn about prevention in this area.
Great. Well, a lot of your comments have tied in with my next question. So Ms. Coulter, you had talked about the various different issues that survivors can encounter, ranging from criminal to immigration. And at Lone Star Legal Aid, we're very fortunate that we span a huge amount of legal aid services, pretty much almost everything under the sun. We have cases that range from family law to consumer rights to fair housing and landlord-tenant relations, foreclosure, public benefits, public education, environmental justice, disaster recovery, tax relief, military veteran benefits, mental health, and more. And in a lot of this work, we partner with community entities just like y'all. And so my next question is, what are, in delivering the services that you provide, what are the challenges that you face, and how do you leverage partnerships with different organizations to meet those types of challenges? Whatever different kinds of organizations, if you want to discuss some of the partnerships, and the second prong, of course, the challenges that you're facing. And Ms. Bassey, we'll start with you, and then Ms. Hill, and then Ms. Coulter.
I think you touched on a lot of the challenges that survivors are experiencing. Something unique about survivors of sex trafficking is they're coming. Also, not only are they having a lot of legal needs, they have a lot of legal needs and divorce, family, law issues, but they also sometimes come with a criminal history, right? Because the nature of trafficking. Oftentimes in the community, they're seen as prostitutes, right? They're seen as someone who is willingly committing a crime. Not only the crime of trafficking, but trafficking intersects with a lot of other issues, right? Sexual assault, interpersonal violence, substance use, drug use, a lot of mental health challenges. So all of these things intersecting created a very difficult environment for a survivor to get out of their situation, right? So some of the biggest challenges that we see are survivors who are coming, they're trying to leave their trafficker, but they don't have the means to take care of themselves, right? So they don't have employment, they don't have skills. If they do have skills or employment or even education, they might have a criminal history that impacts their ability to be hired at jobs that pay a meaningful wage. Oftentimes the survivor may come and they're wanting to get out of the life or get out of their situation. We help them get a job, at places, like fast food restaurants. And that's a very hard, transition, right? Someone who can see how much money can be made in the commercial sex trade, and then moving into a job in which they're not able to take care of themselves or their family or their children. So I think the criminal history creates great barriers for them, not only with, jobs, but also with housing, right? Safe housing. When they're trying to leave their community, trying to leave a location that a trafficker knows, or where they're, wanting to be in a safer environment, finding housing that is affordable, and also finding housing that will accept them with the history, their criminal history. So those are really big barriers. There's family law issues, right? Traffickers using children as a means to maintain control over a victim. So family law issues, traffickers use the system, DFPS or other systems like that to maintain power. So those are some of the things that we see, financial impacts, the social impacts, stigma, right? We know that lots of trafficking victims are never identified. Some of that because the community is not aware of the red flags, but oftentimes victims don't trust providers, to be able to disclose. There's a lot of stigma around commercial sex work. And so victims often don't report, they don't self-identify, and they're even victims of sexual assault and fearful of reporting. Those are some of the challenges. I could go on. Mental health, they need mental health support, right? Basic needs, when you're trying to get out of your situation, food, like some of the simplest things, they need food, social support. One of our biggest initiatives is raising awareness. Survivors tell us like people need to know about your services, right? But when you're working in, areas that, maybe you're not, think about like the immigrant population, right? Or they're not likely to come out, and share their stories. So trying to identify where they are, coming to them, or some of the challenges they face. Relapse is a real issue as well, right? When we saw that, heavily during the onset of the pandemic, when survivors who had, left their situations, lost jobs, right? It creates this dynamic where they know a way to make money. Maybe it's unsafe, maybe it sets them back. So we saw some relapse there with survivors during the pandemic as well. So a lot of financial, economic empowerment opportunities are definitely needed to help people stay out of the life. So when we think about prevention work, which you asked about earlier, we also have to think about what made someone vulnerable to being trafficked in the first place, right? So is it like stigma? Is it mental health? Is it financial, socioeconomic? All of those things come into play when we're trying to help survivors.
As far as some of the challenges that we face, first reaching that community and having them speak out. Sexual abuse isn't something that that people want to speak up about or to tell about. And so it's difficult for us to help them until they are really willing to receive the help. I think that by reaching out to the community, by doing trainings, by educating others, maybe we will be able to reach more children. But I think that those are some of the challenges that we face in reaching survivors, is they are afraid to speak out for whatever that reason is. They don't. And so that makes it difficult for us to meet their needs.
Yeah, I would agree with that as the core challenge for the work related to sexual abuse, sexual assault, domestic violence is that these particular crimes survive and thrive in secrecy and fear and shame. And so as long as perpetrators have the ability to instill fear, shame, secrecy, then they will be able to get away with these crimes, especially if asserted to vulnerable populations like children and those who are undocumented or who may not have the resources or wherewithal to access a resource, some place where they can go and get some type of intervention. And so the thing that I think are barriers that we all have to deal with is, how do we get the word out to the community at large that they should dispel those types of dynamics, make it so that people feel safe, children feel safe, victims feel safe to disclose. Oftentimes we ask the question, why someone would stay in X circumstances. Why are they remaining in a situation where they're not safe, where this person is perpetrating the abuse that they perpetrate and they live with it? And the real question should be, why are people offenders? Why do people choose to perpetrate sexual abuse, sexual violence against typically people that they say that they love, and really start to get at the core of those types of questions and assert the responsibility and level the consequences on that aspect of the issue, as opposed to corroborating the shame and the fear by blaming the victim. And so that's I think at the core of the intersection of all of our work is allowing shame and fear to fester and prevent us from being able to provide these resources in a way that are going to be meaningful and allow people to get out of these situations quickly and with the kind of support that they need to not only get out, but to stay out and heal with the right type of resource, whether it be mental health support or other resources that are available to victims in these particular circumstances. We talked a little bit, I think Ms. Basie mentioned, basic needs. People stay in these situations because the person who's perpetrating the abuse is their sole source of, food and shelter. And so they make those kinds of life-altering choices about survival. And so I don't think that the public at large necessarily appreciates the dynamics that people are challenged with when they're being assaulted in this particular way. And so I think education is the key to helping survivors. And then of course, education around the fact that there are so many resources out there and available, but for someone making it known that that place exists, that they could get, intervention, free legal services, basic needs care, mental health support. People would step up and say, this is happening to me and I need help, or my kid needs help. We need help. So that's really the conversation that should be happening, and it should be happening in a broader way. And there should be modes of communication that allow us to get the messaging out to as many people as we possibly can, so that they understand that they're not alone, and that there are resources available to really impact our community in a way that would diminish these problems.
Thank you, Ms. Coulter. And the theme that I heard in all of these responses is really how challenging it is to come forward and say what it is that happened to you. And given that we are in Sexual Assault Awareness Month, that's one of the huge themes, so that just the public can be more aware of this issue. And I want to turn to the definition of sexual assault. which includes conduct that is any forced, coerced, unwanted sexual contact. It can include different forms of sexual violence, such as, but not limited to, rape and attempted rape, threats and intimidation, unwanted touching, assault by intimate partners or persons known to the victim, child abuse, human trafficking, harassment, and other forms of unwelcome, coerced, or non-consensual activity. And I've read that even conduct online can be included as part of this definition. And so I would like to turn it back over to our presenters to comment on two things, really. First of all, if you have any comments on the definition, on these different forms that we're talking about. And secondly, do you have, given the widespread likely underreporting, any statistics particular to the work that you do, or awareness about this sexual assault epidemic around the country, like any statistics regarding that you'd like to share with our community? And I'll turn it over to Ms. Bassey, and then Ms. Coulter, and then Ms. Hill.
Yeah, so when we think about the definition, the words forced, fraud, and coerced, or really forced and coerced, I think the definition for trafficking includes fraud. I think one of the biggest things that we see when we're trying to train individuals in the community, but also the survivors that we're working with, is being able to identify that they've been coerced, right? Oftentimes, we do a curriculum here with the survivors that come through our program called Ending the Game. And what it does, it's a coercion resiliency program that helps individual survivors identify the ways that they've been forced or coerced, right? And also, it's hard sometimes. So people often say, I think someone mentioned it earlier, why didn't they just leave their situation? They weren't locked up, right? They weren't locked up in a house, but there's elements of force and coercion there, right? So if a trafficker, says, if you leave, I'm going to keep your kids, there's an element of coercion there that often are hard for the broader community to identify, right? Or first responders to identify, or even the survivor themselves to identify. Oftentimes survivors feel that they willingly committed, willingly participated in the encounter, right? And so identifying areas in which they were coerced, whether that be, you mentioned online. So oftentimes like blackmail, we see that a lot with our youth clients, a lot of maybe like online texting and things like that. And then that being able to be used to, keep them in this, in the situation that they're in. So when we think about coercion, I like to think of it like chains. So people say, they're not locked up, but it's invisible chains, right? So what are the things that people are able to use to keep someone a victim in their circumstances? And it can be a lot of things, basic needs. We see coercion with some of the survivors that we're serving who are currently, dependent on drugs, right? So that can be a form of coercion, a trafficker using that to keep someone, being exploited. Family situations, financial is a huge piece, right? Especially when we're thinking about trafficking, when there's that commercial element that's added on top of sexual assault. When we think about, I think you said statistics. I think it's a challenging one when we're talking about trafficking. There's not a lot of great research around the statistics, but one thing that we have seen is that we know that, when we hear from research is that there's less than 2% of victims that are being identified. I imagine that's the same or very similar for, just the general sexual assault community, is that we know that most of it is unreported or unidentified. The other thing that we know, a study by UT that we often rely on, is that there's a lot more victims than we think there are, even within the state of Texas, right? So the study that we reference a lot, UT study, I think it was conducted in 2017. There's over 300,000 victims of trafficking alone in Texas, which is just a high number. Often some of those are labor trafficking victims, but of that, there are over 79,000 minor victims and youth victims of trafficking. And this is in Texas alone. So it is a hard thing to capture, especially when it's something that's going underreported, right? And something in which victims are not self-identifying, the community's not identifying. So there's a lot of work to be done in research, in the area of research and statistics. We always get that, but also identifying what coercion looks like, and for victims to self-identify, which is an ongoing challenge.
One of the things that we need to bear in mind, that the whole aspect of underreporting, but we do have data that is supported by the National Intimate Partner and Sexual Violence Survey, which basically says that 1 in 2 women and 1 in 4 men will experience sexual abuse, sexual violence in their lifetime. That's a huge number. If if you're thinking 1, 2, and we just count, amongst ourselves, 2 of us will have been, victims of sexual abuse if we just did the math. Sexual violence is, common with youth, and typically youth who have been violated will ultimately become adults who have been violated. So that type of data is something that we need to bear in mind as we navigate the issue of sexual abuse and sexual violence. And of course, that is a part of the education and the awareness that the public at large needs to know about, is that when we find, a child who has succumbed to some type of sexual abuse, that we help them now so that they don't ultimately become an adult who is also re-victimized. And oftentimes it is the person who did not get the appropriate intervention that will succumb to subsequent sexual abuse and sexual violence as an adult. So they're a child survivor, they become an adult survivor of sexual abuse as well. And I don't like that particular data and that particular information. And again, I just think that if we had more awareness about the severity and the commonality of the problem, that we would be doing much more to prevent and help to intervene.
So as far as statistics are concerned, I know we all said it's hard to put a number on silence. So I can tell you the statistics that I know, but I think that they are very underrepresented for what our community is. The UT study, I think, is the most accurate one that we have now for Texas about trafficking. But I do want to say that as far as the definition of sexual assault occurs for children, children can't consent. So we start with that for child sexual abuse and child sex trafficking. They cannot consent. There's no consent. And as far as numbers go, it's estimated that 1 in 4 girls and 1 in 6 boys will have experienced some type of sexual abuse by the time that they are 18. It's a lot. It's a lot for children. We see almost 5,000 children a year just here in Houston at our CAC, 5,000. As far as internet safety, there are internet crimes committed against children more now than ever because there are so many predators online. And the FBI put out a statistic that there are an estimated 750,000 child predators online at any given time. So it's not just that we have to worry about children that are out at streets or in the schools or even at playgrounds anymore. While they are home, predators have access to them and they take advantage of that access. The statistic for Texas for children that are abused every day, it's 175 children that we know that are abused in Texas every day. It is way, way too many. This issue is so large in Texas.
Thank you, Ms. Hill. Yeah, from what I've heard, it truly is even more alarming than what you would just think when you look at the definition and when you look at the statistics that are there. And continuing in light of the fear of speaking out from all of these different kinds of abuse that a survivor might have come through. Within the outreach that you do, within the message that you try to deliver to the community, is there a particular message that you can offer to ease the mind of somebody who may be watching and either is considering speaking out or maybe there's red flags that they should be aware of. So one of those two or both, and we'll start with Ms. Coulter and then Ms. Hill and then Ms. Basie.
Yeah, if someone is experiencing or suspect that sexual abuse or sexual some type of violence is occurring in their home or to their children or to them, the message that I want people to hear that are dealing with this is that there is help available, and that there is help available in such a way that it will allow you to safety plan, extrapolate yourself from that situation so that you don't have to continue to be abused in any way. And it's just a matter of, and I shouldn't say just, but it is a matter of having the ability to say that it is happening, and how that looks for that person, whether that be that they present at a school or they present, at a church or some place where they feel safe to disclose it, or they have a friend, or they're hearing this message and they now know that these particular organizations are available to them, but they have to take an affirmative step forward. Most experts who are available to assist them recognize that they will need more than just, okay, we're going to take a report. They're going to need some type of substantial help, safety planning, figuring out what they may need to go forward. And I just want them to know that all of those resources are available if they choose to speak out and speak up.
And I think that's most important, is reporting, because by reporting, you can not only help yourself, but you could prevent abuse from happening to someone else. And that's huge, to be able to help someone else before that abuse occurs. So I would say there are resources, and your story is confidential. And I would hope that you can take advantage of those resources when you're ready to speak out against abuse.
Yeah, I would agree with both of those, obviously. One other additional thing is you're not alone, right? You're not alone in this. There are people who understand, who are here to help. There are resources available. So just taking the first step.
And also just the fact that there might be this feeling ingrained as part of the emotional abuse that people feel guilty and it's not their fault. Like, that's just also another huge message behind this month. So there is a question from the audience, and this is directed towards Ms. Basie. Does the Landing in Houston have any sister organizations in Tyler, Texas?
I think so. I was going to look it up and I'm dropping it in the chat. The one that comes to mind is For the Silent.
Okay, great. And I'll read that out when we get it. And Ms. Coulter touched upon this when we talked about safety planning. So my next question is going to be, can you discuss a little bit more about safety planning and its importance in your work with survivors? And we'll start with Ms. Hill, and then Ms. Coulter, and then Ms. Basie.
You mean like safety within the organization, or planning to prevent abuse?
Safety planning with the survivors who come to you, like sure. Safety plan in place for them. Yeah.
Absolutely. So here at the CAC, we have law enforcement. So we have security here. So it's a pretty safe facility. Our forensic interviews are confidential. So when we do a forensic interview, it can't be viewed by everyone. It's a confidential interview. And therapy services are, of course, confidential as well. So we are very careful with those who choose to come forward to keep their information private, because it really is their information to tell.
So what we do around safety planning is we actually do an assessment of the particular needs of the individual who's coming for our services. If we're talking about sexual assault and sexual abuse, the first thing that we try to offer in our arsenal of legal representation is the possibility of pursuing and getting a protective order for an individual who is dealing with sexual abuse, a sexual assault crime of some magnitude. So we try to prioritize that. But within the dynamics where it's someone who is living in a household with their perpetrator, we work on trying to get them out of that household or exclusive use of that household so that they are not going to be continuing to be subjected to the perpetration of the abuse that they have dealt with before they came to us. For us, sometimes safety planning may be as specific as finding a location for them to stay for a particular period of time so that we can get the protective order or get a kick-out order and get the person removed. Obviously, depending on the person, we're going to seek support from law enforcement because it is a crime and they have the right to speak out about that crime, and it could be criminal consequences directed toward their abuser. So we're always talking to the individual. We use an empowerment model here. We want people to make choices about their circumstances. And so law enforcement intervention might not be what they choose, but they may choose some other things to help them stay safe, get safe, and remain safe. And we really do look at the individual needs and process a plan that will effectively allow them to reach that goal of safety.
Yeah. So safety planning is really at the heart of what we do here. One of our models is we believe that the survivor is the expert in their own life, right? So they know their circumstances, they know the perpetrator, they know they know they're the person who knows the most about that circumstance. And so our model is allowing the survivor to drive the safety planning process. So like Ms. Coulter stated, potentially law enforcement is involved, maybe they're not involved. The other thing that's unique is oftentimes safety planning involves escaping immediately, but it's also safety planning for individuals who are still currently in that situation, right? So thinking of strategies to minimize the harm. Ultimately, we want, obviously we want people to not be victimized anymore, right? To leave their circumstances. And we also know it's very hard for individuals, victims to leave an intimate partner. So navigating that. Our safety planning is case by case, is survivor driven, and includes a wide variety of things. What are the triggers? What are safe locations, safe people, safe phone numbers, strategies to minimize harm? So that's one thing. It's really, I think the biggest piece, it's holistic as well, right? We're identifying all the different areas where harm could potentially occur. And how do you address that? So it definitely takes time. Also, safety planning is a process. It's not a paper. It's not a document that you just fill out, to check it off the box. But in order for it to be effective, it has to be well thought out. It has to engage the person. And we continue to update, right? If their circumstances change, right? We know that potentially if someone becomes pregnant, there's maybe additional risk for harm, right, in that home. So, when there's life changes, revisiting the safety plan. When there's a new episode, revisiting that safety plan, tweaking it, seeing if it worked, if it didn't work, like if the strategies that we came up together, with, they don't work, we need to figure out something else to minimize the harm that may be caused in these relationships.
Thank you, Ms. Basie. And I just want to make sure we read out that the sister organization in Tyler, Texas can be found at the website www.forthesilent.org. That's FORTHESILENT, forthesilent.org. And of course, in line with what Ms. Hill mentioned with the emphasis on confidentiality, for all of our organizations, confidentiality applies, especially in the provision of legal services. And that was why at the beginning we had indicated please avoid from any personal questions, any personal details, because any information exchanged, even in consulting with an attorney, is confidential. And as part of the online safety aspects of some of the websites of our organizations, there's actually on the website a safety exit where you can do a quick click on it. And Ms. Coulter, if you want to talk more about that, and then if Ms. Basie and Ms. Hill, y'all have any features like that, we can share about those. But there is one on the Lone Star Legal Aid website as well in the top right corner.
Yeah, we have the safety alert. It's just an opportunity for someone to get information. And if for whatever reason they're in a home where someone might look at the search history, they will be able to eliminate that search. And so the abusive person would not be able to know that they were accessing information from a resource like ABDA or Lone Star or any other service provider that is specifically trying to aid someone who is dealing with some type of domestic violence or sexual abuse dynamic within a space that they share with the person who could potentially be that perpetrator. And so those safety alerts are really important. In addition to safety alerts on the computer, we have within our call system here at our agency, if I were to call a victim, a number would show up on the caller ID, but it is not a number that if someone were to recall that number, that they could actually call and get us back. And our clients have the ability to call us, but they also have the ability to not have that call be researched by someone who we don't want them to know, or they don't want to know that they're accessing our services.
Ms. Basie or Ms. Hill, any additional comments on that?
Yeah, so those are really great tools. I think the strategy that we use frequently is our staff, right? Knowing you don't call back phone numbers that that we don't know. Things as simple as we don't disclose if someone has ever accessed services or even here in this location. And that could be for community members. It could be for other service providers, which is sometimes rub service providers the wrong way, but we can't disclose that information. Some of the strategies, not texting, when a survivor does call, or when we call a survivor back, asking, are they in a safe location? Is someone else around you? Just being really mindful. Oftentimes survivors will call us in the middle of a crisis, right? There's something going on. So kind of mitigating the harm in the middle of that situation, right? Is this a good time to call me? Things like that. So definitely within the safety planning process, we're talking through things like the best time to call. Are we even sometimes survivors refer themselves and we have to ask are we allowed to call you, or will you always be the one to call us? So those things need to be worked out, even for the people that you are serving.
And we have kind of similar safeguards in place, and we have family advocates that work with the families to walk them through those processes and any concerns that they may have going through them. And kind of to help survivors know that they are safe, that they can talk about what they want to talk about, and that we are going to keep that information. So I think that's really important to know, especially when we talk about prevention, that when we're teaching, that we can say, that this is something that will be kept confidential, so that that you have an open place to talk about what's happened.
Thank you, Ms. Hill. And at Lone Star, we also in every single file have noted when you open, you can see, is it a safe phone number to call? What hours is it safe to call? And it's a regular practice with our clients. Is it safe to send mail to the residential address? What is the best way to make sure that we're not endangering anybody? And actually, we've almost used all of our time. We have time for about one more question. I've certainly learned a lot during this discussion, and thank you all again so much for joining. And so the final question is, how do you empower survivors, and what role can our community play to support this work? And we'll start with Ms. Coulter, and then Ms. Hill, and then Ms. Basie.
I think that at the core of empowerment is allowing the person who we are assisting to be the leader in how they seek your services and how they pursue the resources that you have available, and to always check in with them, giving them the autonomy and the freedom to make the choices for themselves or their loved ones, generally, you know, their children. It's important to recognize that if you're going to have a victim-centered approach, that you understand the courage that it takes for someone to speak up and speak out about this type of abuse that they've experienced, and how much they have had to potentially struggle to seek your services and seek the resources that are available to them in the community, and to make sure that you're always open and available to avail yourself of their choice to seek the resources that you have. It is always their choice. It should always be their choice to actively engage in these community resources, and you should just be there to encourage them and to keep the doors open for them to be able to benefit from what you may have to offer.
I can't remember the order. Was it me or Jennifer?
Ms. Hill, I think, and then concluding with Ms. Basie.
Okay, so as far as empowering survivors, we try to provide them an opportunity to use their voice to talk about what's happened to them, and kind of they get to control their own journey to healing as far as, you know, therapy services and getting involved with other services. We try to give them those opportunities so they can choose how they want to proceed on their journey.
Yeah, I agree. I think I mentioned it earlier that we believe the survivors are the experts, right? And we continue to lean into that within every part. Oftentimes, you know, we don't think what they're doing is the best, right? But again, still empowering them to make their own choices, to lead in the relationship, to lead in the services, resources they're accessing. I think the other thing too is helping them identify where have they been disempowered, right? So where are they not empowered, and what areas of their life are they not empowered? And then helping them to overcome those barriers. I mentioned earlier, a lot of the opportunities that we're working towards are economic opportunities and empowerment opportunities, whether that's job support, education support. Those are some of the ways that we, you know, see empowerment. That's where we hire some of the survivors that we're working so that they can, one, then also speak into the work that we're doing, right? To guide us, to make sure that what we are doing is empowering, that they're leading in the way that we develop programs, but also within the, you know, the one-on-one relationship.
Well, thank you again to all of our inspirational experts today. And I'm not sure if, okay, so we have posted the sites for each of your organizations on Facebook Live for any of our viewers to be able to access. And if you also have phone numbers that you would like to paste in the chat for how people can contact you, and then those will be also transmitted over to Facebook for any of the audience members to be able to contact all of your phenomenal organizations. And thank you again to each of you for all that you do and for sharing your time with us today. I am really looking forward to much more future opportunities to partner together, to support each other's work, and to continue helping all of our survivors move forward into better, more positive chapters.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
And I